So, this is the Hydrogen Fuel Cell Renewable Energy Resource presentation by John Tripp and Bobby Joe Koechlin. First of all, why is it renewable? Well, the hydrogen fuel cell is renewable because it is a reaction using hydrogen and oxygen, which are some of the most simplistic elements in existence. And these two elements are used in a chemical reaction to produce H2O, water, heat, and an electrical current. The electrical current is obviously the product we are after, and H2O and heat would be byproducts or pollutants of this reaction, meaning that it's relatively clean. With one of these products being water, you can separate the H2O molecule into its base components, hydrogen and oxygen, and have a limitless supply of fuel. Granted, you will have to use some energy to take this H2O and produce hydrogen and oxygen from it, separating the molecules. However, take that as you will. Both the elements used as fuel are found in abundance in the world. Hydrogen and oxygen are very common, especially in our atmosphere. And there's little to no pollution besides the thermal pollution that is produced from this reaction. Um, the heat and the water and the electrical current are the only three products of this reaction. The electrical current is obviously the one that we want. H2O is just water. It's not really a pollutant. There's no real danger with that. And the heat is due to the exothermic properties of the reaction. And this was no real concern as far as polluting the environment. So, how does it work? Well, the hydrogen fuel cell uses hydrogen and oxygen to be pushed through three different plates: the anode, the electrode, and the cathode. Um, once these elements meet the chemical reaction, once these elements meet, the chemical reaction occurs, and there's a chemical change, creating a flow of electrons, which creates the power that is created from this reaction, the product that we desire. The advantages of the hydrogen fuel cell are that it is clean. It simply produces, again, electricity, H2O, and heat. There are no emissions of CO2 or anything like that. And there's no threat to the environment in that case. It does not involve combustion, so there's no production of CO2. Again, um, it's a very renewable fuel source. Hydrogen and oxygen are found in abundance in nature, and there's nothing unnatural about either of those fuels. There's no recharging. You can create energy in a remote location as long as you have reliable access to the resources, being hydrogen and oxygen. As long as you have a supply of hydrogen, because oxygen is always all around us, as long as you have a supply of hydrogen, you have an infinite fuel source. Um, the fuel source does not degrade. It's simply hydrogen. And there's very simple maintenance to this reactor that creates the power. And again, there's no sound pollution. It's very quiet, just a chemical reaction. The disadvantages of this method of energy production are that it does not create enough energy for long travels. It produces a very minute amount of energy for the size of the reactor, meaning that it is not a very effective means of power creation at this stage of development. The materials needed to create the reactor are pretty expensive in comparison to other methods of energy production, especially when you compare it to the use of fossil fuels, which is the norm and the current standard for the world. Uh, the majority of cars on the road, a very high majority, use fossil fuels to produce their energy and create locomotion, which is why it is so hard to create new fuel sources in the car environment because it's such an industry standard to use gasoline or fossil fuels to power your cars. And to break this standard is very inconvenient for the driver, meaning because there are not a lot of options for fueling. There's not a lot of hydrogen fuel stations along the road. And things of that nature create a very high barrier for entry for this type of product. However, the hydrogen fuel cell is an exception because of how clean it is. Um, it will take many years to fully perfect the technology and get it to a point where it's actually a reliable fuel source for travel. However, there are prototype cars that are in production, which we'll go over later in our concrete examples. However, there are no real feasible means of transportation based upon this method of energy production. As well as that, it's hard versatile, convenient storage of the hydrogen fuel. Where it's used. Well, these energy cells are oftentimes used in electric cars as a primary fuel source, as well as in commercial buildings such as factories, shops, and stores. However, the main focus is, again, these electric cars that we'll mention later on in the next slide, actually. And these are not very common because there's, again, not a very reliable method of using this production to create enough energy to power locomotion for a long, sustained uh, trip. So it's very short term and very low area of travel, and it is not very feasible for current cars or for current use. However, it is in production and it is in research, and there will be more sustainable and more realistic incantations or variations of this reactor in the near future, hopefully. So here are some concrete examples of this. The 2015 Toyota Mirai is on the far right next to the hydrogen fueling station. The 2017 Hyundai iX35 FCEV on the far left is the more minivan type or SUV type car. The 2017 Honda FCX Clarity is in the center, and that's more of a sedan style car that's fairly stylish. And here are our citations.